Hey everyone, Phil Travis here, your history professor. This is History 360, military history. I'm going to do these short little PowerPoint presentations at the beginning of each week to help us with considering the subjects for the week. And this week I want to do an introduction um, to the course. Um, This is a U.S. military history course, but this introduction is going to be, it's going to extend more broadly to consider the significance of military history and military events to the world today. So I think the overarching question is with history was why study it? So why study military history? Take a second. Why do you think we should study military history? Why does it matter? Well, I think first and probably the most significant is this simple statement: wars that are won and lost shape the world. Um, the way the world would look today would have been very different if Nazi Germany had succeeded in Europe. The way the world would look today would be very different if uh, well, there are numerous examples. These go without saying. But wars won and lost shape the world. A war that is won or lost will determine who controls resources. It will determine who controls trade and shipping lanes. It will influence economics. It will shape future generations and their perspective on war because of the cost of a particular war in terms of their economy, but also in terms of human lives and suffering. Um, so wars shape populations and they shape the world, whether it's economics, whether it's human suffering and the perspective of people towards war, um, whether it is global trade, shipping lanes, so on and so forth. Military history and military events are very significant for shaping the world. Also, and I bet you a lot of you guys thought about this one, and that is that military affairs and military conflict have, for good or ill, been catalysts for technological, medical, and scientific advances in the world. Wars often, and this is not a universal thing, but oftentimes wars rely on technology. Technology in warfare, and this goes back to really the earliest forms of warfare, whether it was bronze metallurgy or iron weapons or steel weapons or the airplane. Technology is incredibly significant in military affairs. Competing powers are constantly looking for the technological advantage that can give them a military power over another and therefore allow their ability to expand their control in areas of economics and in trade and so on and so forth. So military is always a driving competition for technology, and generally, as a general rule, those who adapt the best technology the soonest and the best will be most successful, and those who do not will fail. Now, this is not a universal. That's not a universal principle. There are other kinds of warfare, guerrilla warfare, unconventional warfare, where technological advantages perhaps matter less. However, technological development on the battlefield has led to advancements in medical technology, scientific advancements, and so on and so forth. Numerous examples that we'll be looking at throughout the course. And also just a basic one, understanding the past allows one to make better decisions in the present. That really goes without saying. But nonetheless, how we look at the past will depend on our ability to rationally and fully consider a historical subject. The lessons of the past are not universal, that are just guarantees. We debate the lessons, and what wars and past events mean oftentimes are things that historians and society struggle over. So past lessons are not always as clear as we might think they should be or that they are, but understanding them can help us to be more critical of the decisions that we make in the present. perhaps, one of the biggest examples of a past lesson from a war factoring in future endeavors is the so-called lessons of Munich, in which during in 1938 the Allies, the British and the French particularly, gave Hitler the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia at the outset, really, of World War II, and that was considered one of the great appeasements, one of the great failures in the lead up to World War II. And since that point, including today, many policymakers will interpret quite an array of events from the perspective of remembering the lessons of Munich. And what that means is preventing an aggressive military power from taking an advantage of a weak situation. It means not appeasing your enemy, but rather standing up to them. And that has had that kind of belief, which has been held by many, many presidents from Harry Truman on down the line. But that belief is sometimes accurate, but other times not accurate. And sometimes it causes for poor decisions in the present. Anyway, excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. Some of the examples going back to ancient times include the adoption of composite bows and war chariots, which gave groups like the Hyksos the advantage to conquer the Egyptians during the Middle Kingdom. The application of the English longbow in the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, and the really the end of heavily armored infantry of the Middle Ages because of their lack of mobility. Adoption of gunpowder weapons, industrial change and the usage of machine guns, tanks, and gas, and nuclear technology. All of these are huge and significant technological changes. And the ones who were able to control and apply these kind of changes the best were the ones that have ultimately, in many cases, been the most successful. Tactical changes. Tactics, guys, is different from strategy. Strategy refers to your overall plan in a theater of operations. Tactical changes refers to the manner in which a unit will fight on the battlefield, usually no larger than a division. So, associated with technological change are continuing tactical changes, and the ones who are able to, again, master the tactical changes are often the most successful, but not always the most successful. So one example of probably the most significant tactical change in military history was the Greek phalanx, which evolved ultimately over time into what became known as the Napoleonic square. The Greek's phalanx, and later the infantry square. In this image below, you see British soldiers in an infantry square. Infantry squares were designed to provide a defensive wall against oncoming cavalry attacks, and they were also designed to maximize the defensive square's firepower. The Greeks applied this actually to great success during the Persian Wars. The Persian military relied on cavalry and mobility, and the Greeks relied on their hoplites, which was the name of their soldiers, and the phalanx, this defensive square formation, as well as geographical advantage, to thwart the Persian conquerors in the ancient era. Napoleon, of course, also used these formations to great advantage. Napoleon tended to use really a variant of squares, and he would use cavalry as well, and Napoleon would use position heavy artillery on the flanks. So Napoleon was a master of kind of incorporating defensive square techniques into modern or at that time modern pre-industrial warfare, using heavy artillery, using cannon fire, cavalry, as well as infantrymen. Napoleonic Square, the Greek phalanx, all of these are part and parcel to the development of professional and organized militaries, in which organization and training were absolutely critical. These were a huge break from your old melee, in which fighters went out on the battlefield and kind of fought have at it with axes or swords. Instead, these organized professional soldiers relied on their training and their organization to act as part of a formation. And through the formation, they maximized their firepower and their defensive abilities. This led to the rise during the 1600s and the 1700s of great drill masters like Baron von Steuben, who of course helped the United States or the American revolutionaries as they fought their revolution against the British. This era of revolutionary warfare, if you will, during the 16 and 1700s, soldiers relied particularly on column formations, line formations, and square formations. These were organized formations that the soldiers carried out due to drill and training. Because soldiers come under intense fire and intense pressure, you have to be trained and drilled properly to maintain your ranks and understand that your ranks is the key to your success. So that's one example of one of the most significant tactical changes of the of military history. And tactical changes are very significant, and tactical changes often involve the adoption and incorporation of certain types of technological advancements as well. One example of a war in which technological advancement really challenged the tactical thinking of military leaders was World War I. World War I became a stalemated industrial war in which opposing armies in the tradition ultimately of Napoleonic warfare, in the tradition of more traditional warfare at least, formed lines that ultimately stalemated and became entrenched during on the Western Front during World War I. And there were numerous industrial technologies incorporated to try to break that stalemate, but they were ultimately unable to do so. However, the tactical advantage, the tactical change that really allowed for the technology of the industrial era to really be used to its most deadly effectiveness was called Blitzkrieg, which meant lightning war. It was a German style of warfare that was adapted during World War II. And Blitzkrieg relied on using tank divisions, artillery support, heavy artillery, and air power to basically focus on a very small area of the enemy's lines and overwhelm it with force, and then obtain a massive breakthrough that would allow you to envelop through pincer movements huge portions of the enemy military from their rears. It was a huge development that it happened during World War II, but it applied the technologies of World War I to provide the Germans with a tactical advantage at the outset of World War II. So applying technological developments into tactical change can often allow for great success on the battlefield. And so we will also be looking at some of these changes in the history of U.S. military warfare, and also considering how the new war on terrorism, the new kind of war that's faced today, again is a challenge of technology and a challenge for not just strategy but also tactics. Industrial warfare, last point, industrial warfare of the First World War, the Second World War, of the Civil War, was more deadly, but it did ultimately give rise to revolutions in battlefield medicine. And today, as a result of changes in battlefield medicine that came about from World War II, from the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, American soldiers enjoy some of the best battlefield support when it comes to getting the wounded off of the battlefield. And so industrial warfare becomes incredibly more deadly initially, but it did give rise to revolutions in battlefield medicine. And also, of course, in the modern war on terrorism today, technology, various forms of technology, intelligence, drones, laser-guided missiles, these types of things have allowed the United States to fight industrial technological wars in a way that is far less deadly to individual soldiers, at least in number. Of course, many soldiers are wounded and horribly wounded in war, but on a less of a scale than they were during the First World War or the Civil War or World War II or even Vietnam. So these are some of the things we're going to look at in the class. We're going to focus on U.S. Military history in this class, and we're going to particularly look at the American Revolution, the Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, Vietnam, and our modern war on terrorism. Those are the big kind of military areas that we're going to look at in the class, and we're going to trace some of the big changes that happened from really a pre-industrial warfare to an industrial war, to guerrilla war and unconventional war and air mobile conflicts. We're going to look at some of these massive changes that happened, what they mean for American military history, and what they mean for the future of war, and also what decisions might be the best decisions to make for the United States when it comes to war in the world. I hope this is helpful, and have a great week, guys.